Welcome to the Arts and Oddities podcast with A.M. Hall, starring A.M. Hall. Now, here is A.M. Hall.
Welcome to Art and Oddities with A.M. Hall, where I talk about anything that strikes my fancy, to include all kinds of creative works, from children's cartoons to underground zines, to identity politics and everything in between. My guests and I will discuss how art impacts and reflects culture and counterculture, enables individualism and conformity, and have loads of fun along the way. I am your host, A.M. Hall, aka Anthony Bonafini, aka Galena Storm, aka Aquaces Mancuso. On today's episode, I take a minute to introduce myself, tell you about my show, and face up to interfacing. Then in part 2, I talk with Reverend Panik Bedlam about some goals for our podcast. We ask, what is art anyways? And try to remember what ASMR stands for. It's Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, by the way. All this and more coming up on the Art and Oddities podcast with A.M. Hall. Welcome to Art and Oddities. I finally got the show on the road. Normally, this is the part of the podcast where I'd be talking about what I've been working on lately, but since what I've been working on lately is the podcast, then I will give you the obligatory first episode, who I am and why I chose to do this. One of my superpowers is attracting interesting people to me and getting them to talk about interesting things. So I figured I might as well use my superpowers to become a superhero and save everyone from boredom. My primary thing is fashion design. I tend to work with different textures and monochromatic color schemes and with pretty floral prints. My background is theater, so I've also done a lot of costume design. There are plenty of other things I do as well. I play the ukulele, and I sing too. Um, You'll hear me talk a lot about television shows such as Steven Universe. I'll go into my philosophy on style tribes and queer culture. I won't shy away from politics if it's relevant, but I'll keep everything in good humor. I work partnered with Panik Bedlam a lot. I've done a lot of editing for her projects. My first editing project with her was Everybody Hates Her. I've also done editing on the Art and Occult Nonsense series, and I wrote the first book in that series, actually. I wrote Elementals. And I also helped her put together a tarot deck. One of the projects we've been working on together recently is a film, and I've been doing a lot of costume design for the film. And oh gosh, the look on my face when I am faced with interfacing. One of the costumes that I'm working on right now is essentially a bathrobe, because the character is a wizard. So it's a bathrobe that, ties in the front with a shawl collar, and it's, pretty standard bathrobe. But I got to a certain point and I realized I had forgotten to cut my interfacing pieces. Now, what interfacing is, it's a type of fabric with glue on one side of it that is activated with heat. And what it is you iron it, press it to the wrong side of your fashion fabric in order to give the fashion fabric more body, more stiffness, and that will help it to hold its shape better. And interfacing is normally used on things like collars and cuffs, so the pieces tend to be pretty small, but on this particular pattern, the pieces are enormous. They go all the way from the back of the neck all the way to the floor. They're huge. And my fabric, my sewing space is not set up for both sewing and cutting at the same time. So in order to cut fabric, I have to put away my sewing equipment and take out my cutting equipment. In order to sew, I have to put away my cutting equipment and take out my sewing equipment. So it was a bit of a process when I realized I had forgotten to do this. It was kind of an all-day project in order to get these interfacing pieces cut out. And the moral of the story there is prepare ahead of time. Don't forget to do your prep work. I will be interviewing various artists of various types. There are a lot more types of art than I think most people realize. I look at things like blogging and video blogging as art. I have several friends who do that, and I'm sure I'll have them as guests on the show at some point or another. Heck, I view the daily taking of selfies as art. I have several friends who are poets and photographers. I've got at least one friend who goes into critical analysis of cooking, so I'm sure I'll have those folks on my show at some point or another. I'll also interview some more traditional artists as well. Thanks to Panic, I know some painters who work both digitally and with traditional media, but they tend to have pretty deep contemporary subject material. I'll speak with musicians as well. I hope to have the composer of my theme music on here eventually. Kion Huru Orion, or as I know him, Michael. Maybe I'll go out and do some street interviews, collect some human interest stories, and some inhuman interest stories. I'll also be hosting roundtable discussion on all manner of subjects, but with a focus on culture and personal expression. Today, I'll be having a panel discussion with Panik Bedlam, who I mentioned earlier. All right, let's get started. All right, this is AM Hall again here, and I am here with my very first guest, Panik EVlynn Bedlam,
or Evie for short.
Or Evie for short. Hi, Evie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Evie has helped with the production and editing of this podcast and is also a local artist here in our town. And for those reasons, will probably be a pretty regular guest on this podcast.
We hope so.
All right. As I said in the first segment, I've helped Evie a lot with their work, and we'll probably talk a lot more about that in later episodes. But it's not for this one.
We'll get to it.
Yeah. This episode is basically talking about my higher goals for the podcast in general. What I hope to achieve here.
Since it's the first episode, might as well get into that and get it over with.
Yeah. So, one of the things I'd really like to do is open up people's minds when thinking about art. You know, help people foster some interest and help people artistically express themselves. So, Evie, what do you think? What is art and what can be art?
Well, I think that's a pretty heavy subject to start with. Like, it's a big question, and I think that for that reason you get a lot of answers. For some people it's like visual art, some people it's music. You know, some people it's dancing, some people it's found art, as you said in the opening. Some people just being able to capture their own self-expression, like in selfies and stuff. That's photography, that's art. But at the same time, what can be art? Anything can be art, but is it relevant? Does it have a use or something to say? I think everything, even stuff that has a very shallow, blasé sort of message behind it, still has a message. But that's kind of a, like you said, perspective. It's that you choose to have an artistic framing on something, whether in expression or when looking at something. I think that's the relative part, whether you can look at it and have meaning in it.
Okay. All right. So is the question of what is art, is that even a useful question?
I think that some people might argue the other way, but I think it actually is, because when you discuss what is art, you're kind of actually parsing art itself and thus getting kind of to the deeper meaning. Like, really good art you don't need to have explained, but you can talk about it for a really long time anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's helpful, but at the same time, by asking the question, it implies that some things are not. And that's where you get into where, like, things just are said to be low art or they're pornography or things like that. You got to be careful about, like, dismissing things. You don't want to throw anything out, because there's a lot of stuff that kind of just is part of the junk that comes out of existence, and, you know, it's hard to say that it has value, but,
I mean, a lot of art, a lot of people would say that art is things that are beautiful, but it's not just, it's also things that are visceral.
Visceral and challenge, especially in my art, as you're aware, I like to kind of get people thinking about stuff. I'm not necessarily trying to offend them, but I'm trying to, bring up stuff that's hard to talk about. But, sometimes you can kind of think around the edges of it.
Yeah, yeah. What is the point of art?
I think that, like, it's trying to say something to people. Like, as an artist, you have messages and ideas. Sometimes you aren't even sure what you're saying while you're doing it. But a lot of times, like, there's some intention underlying. You have a sense of where you're going, even if you don't know for sure. So, like, trying to communicate your ideas. At the same time, it's about receiving them, too. Like, that's why I think things like criticism and art analysis, which are very popular at the moment in kind of like pop videos throughout the internet, we're certainly going to probably be doing some analysis ourselves.
I would say that analysis is itself a form of art.
I agree. One of our friends, Motomac, who has a very different type of show on the internet about cooking, who will probably get on here at some point.
Yeah, he's definitely on my list of guests.
He very much, the book that he helped me write was about essentially art criticism and kind of analysis of movies and films and plays and stuff, and I tried to make a very good effort at, recognizing that looking at art can be an art in itself, interpreting it.
Mm-hmm. So how does one become open-minded?
I think that you want to be receptive, especially with what we're talking about with art. How do you, like, broaden your horizons and be more open to stuff? Well, part of the thing is trying to understand the context. I think empathy is a good thing to foster as an artist. Because being able to turn your eye inward and kind of see what's in your own head is good, but if you are able to turn one eye outward and kind of be genuinely intuitive to what's going on with other people, one of the easiest ways to do that is look at, like, if you're looking at another culture, looking at their art, what they value in their art.
Okay.
And so, like, by becoming more interested in other people's conditions and other people's feelings and what they have to say, you start becoming more receptive to it and thus more open-minded to concepts that you might find.
And why would someone want to become more open-minded, like you said?
Well, why does a workman at a shop need 20 different types of hammers, the more tools you have at your disposal to be able to, like, think about things and, to kind of express yourselves, the better you're going to be at expressing yourself. So,
okay.
More nuance to your life, be able to appreciate things a little more.
I own 3 different sewing machines at the moment.
So, there you go.
All right. Fostering interest. Now, I have to make a confession here. I grew up under an absolute rock. I didn't listen to, pop music the way my peers did. I listened to Weird Al. And even though I read voraciously, I didn't really read a whole lot of different kinds of things. I tended to read...
Like, what did you read?
I've read books in a series. Like,
okay.
As a younger kid, I would read, the Sweet Valley teen books, and I read most of the Star Wars novels.
I read a lot of X-Men comic books myself, but,
okay.
That was sort of the serial elements to what I was into, and I listened to a lot of old vinyl and stuff that my parents had laying around, or that I picked up at garage sales. But that gives you, like, I wasn't into pop music till I was much older.
Well, you know what? You were into pop culture, though, because you read comic books. I didn't even do that.
Oh, most of the comics I read were older, the weird ones that were like 10 for a dime. Like, and that's not when, comic books were 10 for a dime. It's when they were like $2.50, but nobody could sell them. So to get them out of the shop's basement, they'd like discount warehouse them.
That's funny. But the point to all that is that it's really easy to get stuck in a rut.
Absolutely. You want to make sure, like what you were saying with broadening perspectives, like, you also have to focus down on some stuff, but you don't want to over-focus.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to find things. Like, as I got older, I went from reading a lot of, like, weird fiction to a lot more, not even nonfiction, like classical literature. Like, I read a lot of, like, historical documents now and a lot of spiritual documents from ancient times and stuff, as people who are into my art might know. But you do want to find new stuff and things that are not usual to what you do, because knowing what you know is great, but you can't be a one-trick pony. You gotta find some new stuff.
Branch out a bit, yeah. And it was, for me, a lot of the time it was, I would not take a friend's recommendation unless, they sat me down and said, no, I think you specifically need to read this specifically.
I think that sort of recommendation does help for some people. Like, I think that it matters, like, who's making the recommendation, though. Like,
there is that. I won't just read whatever just because some random schmo tells me to. On the other hand, if a lot of people are recommending the same thing, like if I go to the internet and everyone on the internet is talking about,
oh, if everybody on the internet jumped off a bridge, would you? Oh, no.
Well,
no,
if everybody on the internet jumped off a bridge, then the bridge is obviously on fire.
Yeah, probably. But no, I get what you're saying. Like, there's a consensus to that sort of thing. But then again, with art, too, it's not always that the popular thing, because sometimes that's the thing with most mass appeal, but isn't necessarily the most deep. It doesn't necessarily have the most message. Like, usually the best artists aren't necessarily the most popular ones, at least at their outset. Usually when their time comes later, after society has had time to process their new or revolutionary ideas, you get a lot of that in modern music. Like, you have the musician who's on the fringe until they die, and then all of a sudden they're the thing. That's been going on with poets and artists forever. It's
you gotta be dead to find out if you're any good.
Yeah, unfortunately, that seems like an endemic problem to it. But
yeah, that's a shame.
But
so,
you gotta try, and I think I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What word?
No, just how does one find local artists and basically become
into that? Like, so you're still actually supporting people who are around. Yeah, that's a tough thing, because you have to keep your nose to the ground, to really find these people, because it's like we're based out of a relatively small city in upstate New York, which there's artists around. We're near schools, several of them, so there's people in and out of this vicinity. But if you live in a big place, maybe it's easy, but other places you really have to listen to your friends and look out for flyers and things for bands that are playing. Usually you start going to things like that. You have to participate in your community a little bit. That's not always the greatest or funnest thing, because not the local scene might not be your scene. But if that's the case, it feels like you gotta find your people. As our friend Nick Eradicata says, you find your tribe and and then you do your best to build them up. So me and her, we've been working on videos and stuff. So yeah, once you find them, work with them, promote them, tell everybody you know about them.
Well, speaking of videos, let's talk about how the internet has promoted the sharing and rivalry of art.
Oh, that's a big topic too. But yeah, we'll probably get into that one several times. But
but no, I just wanted to share, like, one of the things that's really popular right now on the website Tumblr is writing prompts. Someone will post, "Hey, I think this idea is really neat. What if X, Y, and Z happened?" And then someone else will just randomly write a story about that thing and just post it right underneath.
Well, I think that you've stumbled upon something for the previous topic, because I've gone to writing groups in the area, and one of the biggest things that they like to do is do writing prompts, and it's good exercise. I've done a few. I've started a few stories based on some good prompts, kind of twisted around.
But you know what? It's not always writing either. Like, sometimes someone will take one of these prompts and draw a short little comic about it too. That can also happen.
I think that that's the good side of the internet. It gets people kind of out there and kind of challenging themselves, giving themselves reasons to practice. Because if you're going to be an artist, practice is the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be good at it to be good at it, and you do that by practicing.
On the other hand, you're competing with pretty much everyone else too.
Yeah, that's the other problem though, and it's there's so much. It used to be like, yeah, you might get some stuff in books from all over the place and stuff, but your local community had to have a culture of its own, or else it didn't have culture. And unfortunately, now nobody feels the need to locally manufacture that.
Yeah.
Except for the people who are driven to it. There's no local need anymore. They can import the best from wherever. So, yeah, you end up in competition with the whole world, and then you have to dig through a bunch of tin for a ruby,
Yeah. Let's talk about craft as art. If someone decides to copy someone else's work, is that still art?
Well, there's a difference between plagiarism and practice. You go into any traditional art school or technique, you're going to have people who go to the museums and sit next to the painting and try to copy the masters, because that's what they used to do. The apprentice would copy or do the busy work for the master after the master showed him how to do it. Just like you don't necessarily need to come up with new concepts, like the people who do fanfic style art or fan art kind of stuff. I started off a lot of my drawing and stuff doing that sort of thing. Like I got inspired to start at 5 years old watching a special on how Jim Davis drew Garfield. I don't really list him in my main influences anymore, but I was saying, I drew a lot of the X-Mans. I drew a lot of Wolverine fighting with claws and stuff, and all that stuff. But,
so Wolfman fighting with Wolverine. Does art have to be revolutionary?
I think it should be. I think in its highest form, it tries to not necessarily create revolution, but to revive what's sort of dead. Like I vibe a lot on mythological themes myself, and like the rebirth concept, especially rebirth through art or through some natural process, like through an evolution of consciousness. I think that that's what art in its highest form is, but at the same time, good graphic design that like makes a book easier to read is just as useful, that makes a website easier to access. That
so it doesn't have to be revolutionary in order to be good art.
You're a fashion designer who tends to favor things that are practical and functional over like the really la-di-da high fashion.
It's true.
So you certainly can understand that there is a craft and an insight that comes into that sort of stuff. But at the same time, it depends on what you're striving to do. Are you a bricklayer or are you an architect? And, both are needed to make the building, but who has the vision that's greater? Well, but also who's satisfied with their lot. There's something to be about keeping your hands busy, and there's a lot of artists who understand that you need to keep slinging mortar or else, nothing gets built. And you feel sad about it. So,
and this art as self-expression can definitely affect how people see you, how you want to be seen.
Oh yeah, I think that that's actually a trend that's been on the rise for like my entire life. Just look at how many people have facial piercings and tattoos and funny colored hair and stuff.
Body mods.
Yeah,
as
like
a form of self-expression.
Oh, it certainly is. Going all the way back, like the tribal shaman, that's how he made himself a holy vessel, was by marking it with tattoos and scarification and things like that. So, and that's a world culture thing, not any individual group.
So not only does self-expression affect how people see you, but it can also help you express your identity to your surroundings and help you identify fellow members of your tribe.
Oh, well, yeah, talking about Nyx again, I had a run-in with her, and she took one look at me, because you can't see me here, but I usually have some wild color hair and things like that. Usually a little gothy looking, even though I don't particularly goth identify.
You're pretty punk.
Oh, okay, I'll go with that. But she took one look at me, and in our small town, there's not a lot of us, and she's like, you're one of me. Let's get together and do some stuff. And, soon we were talking about, like, riot girl punk and different music that we liked and the type of art we like to do. She does some painting and stuff, but she mostly writes. I usually think of her as a poet. But, now she's doing those ASMR, I can't ever remember. The ones where you soft talk and it's interesting. She does hiking video ones like that now that she's been starting to do, so,
I actually don't know what that is, so I'm definitely going to ask about that when I have her as a guest on my podcast.
Okay, well, I'll show you some after the show. So,
Well, that's fantastic.
and we'll put some links in it for help her out.
Well, we've been talking for roughly 18 and a half minutes. I think that we're just about done here.
I think that we can wrap it up. Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, it was wonderful to have you here today.
It was wonderful to be here. I certainly will be looking forward to being back. So,
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Art and Oddities podcast with A.M. Hall. That's our show for today. Looks like we made it through our first episode in one piece. We're sorry for the minor sound issues. We're still working out some technical difficulties. We will only improve from here, so help us get better by supporting the show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and give us a review on iTunes. You can also follow us on Facebook. Join our group at facebook.com/groups/oddartpodcast, all one word. Or on Twitter at twitter.com/artodditiespod, one word. We're setting up a YouTube channel now. It should be available by next week. Keep an eye out in the show notes. The production and editing of this podcast has been provided by Reverend Panik EVlynn Bedlam, and without her it would not exist. If you'd like to support this podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/panikbedlam. That's PANIKBEDLAM. As we produce more shows, we will be putting more content on Patreon exclusively for patrons. You can also help Panik by buying her books or tarot cards. You can find them by searching Panik Bedlam on lulu.com and thegamecrafter.com. Direct updates and show notes are available at panikbedlam.com/podcast. We are currently having a conflict with our web domain, so if that link doesn't take you there, try the slightly longer sites.google.com/site/panikbedlam/podcast. We hope to have this worked out shortly. In the show, we mentioned the ASMR videos by Nyx. You can find those on her YouTube channel under the name Nyx Eradicatus. That's Nix space ERADICATUS. There you will also find a few Horror Cult Renaissance videos she produced, also starring Panik. You can also follow her horror movie group at facebook.com/horrorcultrenaissance, all one word. For those of you interested in cooking with cast iron or chaos magic, you might want to check out our friend Modemac's blog, which gives links to all his projects. You can find that at modemac.com. That's MODEMAC. Our theme music, Doxal Dance in Spacetime, or Belial and His Seven Wives, was composed and performed by Kion Huru Orion, or as I know him, Michael. Thanks, Michael. If you'd like to contact the show with comments or suggestions, you can email us at artodditiespodcast@gmail.com. Next episode, I'll tell you a little bit about my ukulele, and Evie and I will discuss kids' cartoons in this golden age of television. That about wraps it up. Remember, the highest form of magic is doing, and expressing yourself is art. This is A.M. Hall, signing off.